appreciate the invitation to come here today. I belonged to this organization many years ago, and then I started working Sundays, but I think it's probably time to rejoin and think about trying to get back eventually. I'm not going to be working Sundays in the near future. And well, I'd like to be able to start the camp again. And I look out over the group and I see many old friends and new friends involved in history around here. And thinking back when I first spoke to this group many years ago, and back then I was kind of a young historian starting out. Now I'm kind of coming on the downside of my career with the state of Wyoming. And so it's good to come back, and a beautiful day like this when you look out and see the trees changing and everything, and come back to your roots as far as where you started out here in history. When I was contacted about the program, the first thing was, well, gee, we're going to have enough information to do this, and then it was how am I going to cut this all down and make it worthwhile, because there's been a lot of new research over the years on the Wagon box fight. And in looking at the newsletter, I appreciate the confidence that these studies have verified the proper location, and we're going to lay it to rest, the final location of the Wagon box fight today. I would not give that statement over in Johnson County. So, I guess, and I really, in many ways, I'm going to do as the archaeologists that did the project back in 1993 and 94 basically said that it almost does, but we're not guaranteeing it. So, but we'll go over some of the facts of this, and I did bring some artifacts just by way of background on what has happened in archaeology out there. I'm not going to give you the whole story of the Wagon box fight again. Many of you read it. If you haven't read it, I recommend a book called The Wagon Box Fight by Jerry Keenan. This has been updated over the years. It's grown over the years. It now includes a lot of the archaeology from the 1993-94 investigations. And this would probably be a thing I'd recommend for the Wagon box fight. So what I'm trying to talk about today of the battle itself, and kind of in relation to this idea of the site, and what the archaeology has done as far as proving or disproving concepts and thoughts about where the Corral site was. It was pretty neat excavations that they took care of out there. But it's more of a surface investigation, but everything was for the first time probably over a broad area, over 40 acres, properly shot in and mapped in, and so it was probably one of the most complete investigations done the Wagon box fight. And over the years, really going back to the turn of the century, people have been doing work out there and had been digging and finding artifacts along the way. So there's been a lot of thought about it for over 100 years now. And that's an interesting thing to think of, that over the past 100 years, when this controversy of the site first kind of raised its head, to today, you know, we have evidence now that, for me, kind of shows where things are, and maybe for someone else it might raise more questions for them. As we all know in history, there's never much controversy, so we don't have to worry about that. What we came up with in terms of just the raw material, I brought one bag, and there's everything in here from modern fence nails to just horseshoes, modern horseshoes, maybe, you know, ox shoes. We have, this is one bag. There's about 10, 15 bags in the box. We've got 3 boxes of these out there. So then you get into that much material and what it all means. And then I pulled some of the better artifacts that kind of I thought you might be interested in, that I'll pass around to the group as I talk up here then. But just by way of background on the Wagon box fight, just to quickly set the stage for those of you that might not be familiar with the subject. And I know some of you might have been involved in that excavation back there in 93, 94, so bear with me if you realize maybe I'm a little rusty on some of the facts of that itself. But the Wagon box fight itself took place on August 2nd of 1867, and along with the Fetterman fight, 2 major battles around Fort Cook Kearney during those 2 years of its existence, from 1866 to 1868. And it came down in legend over the years. the brave stand of, a small group of 30 some soldiers and civilians fighting off several hundred Indians over a period of 5 hours. If you read the Wagon Box Monument put up in the 1930s, it's a wonder there were any Indians left in the territory after the battle, because they said anywhere from 300 to 3,000 were killed in the battle. Probably a lot less than that. Captain Powell estimated about 60 of the Indians. A lot of their oral traditions were about 6. So somewhere in the smoke of that battle, things, well, got a little, I guess, extremes on both sides of that. But anyway, again, it's a legendary battle because of the fact you have this image of these, this small group of men standing charge after charge, which did happen during the battle itself. Basically, the battle came out of the fact that Fort Kearny was a fort of wood, and they required timber for construction of the fort, building of the stockade, the buildings themselves, and also for firewood, the basic necessities of living there. And really, from the first time, the first month that the fort was built in July of 1866, for the next 2 years, that would be very much a weak point of the fort. The fort was 5 miles from where the timber was, so they had to go cut the wood and bring it back. And the Indians did not attack the fort itself, but they would attack the timbering operations or try to drive off livestock from either haying or timbering operations that might be away from the fort itself. The Fetterman Battle, which took place on December 21st, was the culmination of the early skirmishes that took place in that late summer and fall of 1866. And then in 1867, in the spring, the Indians again began to raid against the soldiers at the fort. The main tribes involved here were the Lakota, Sioux, and Cheyenne, and then some of the Arapaho. And in that summer of 1867, 2 events took place that would eventually lead to the Wagon Box fight itself. Reinforcements arrived at Fort Kearny during the summer, and they received some new weapons called the breech-loading second elephant version Springfield, essentially the old Civil War musket that was converted to take a metallic cartridge and could fire quite rapidly compared to the old muzzle-loading rifles. So they got those. They got the breech-loading rifles in early July of 1867, issued them that month, and so by the time that the Wagon Box took place, the soldiers that were there would have these breech-loading rifles. They hadn't had much experience with them, but they did have those guns at the time that the battle took place. The other thing is that the Indian forces and the Indian tribes had come together for sun dances in the summer of 1867. And again, you had a large concentration of Indian warriors available for action there. And so it was decided to strike a blow against the Bozeman Trail forts. There's disagreement, though. Most of the Cheyenne warriors, probably 500 to 800 of them, went to Fort C.F. Smith. And on August 1st, they attacked a hay cutting party. It was called the Hayfield Fight. And then most of the Lakota and some of the Cheyenne came up to Fort Kearny and decided that they would launch their strike against the wood cutting parties along the present-day Story and to the south of that area there. And they've been cutting wood there for over a year by then. So there's established roads through there, and the contractors had taken the wagon boxes off the wagons and stored them where there's a junction of roads on the road that led back to the fort. Took off the wagon boxes and used them as a corral for stock, and the military escort that was protecting the woodcutter decided, well, it might make a pretty good fort if we needed it. It wasn't a planned position. I was talking to some retired military personnel the other day, and they were questioning the fact that it wasn't quite in the military crest. Well, and it didn't seem like the best place for a field of fire. Well, the soldiers really did place the wagon boxes there. It was done by the contractor, and then the Army just adapted it to use as a fortification. But the wagon box corral itself was 14 wagons, about 70 by 30 feet in diameter. And the soldiers, the one company soldiers, about 40 to 50 men, had set up camp right to the south where the wagon boxes were. And now, when we get to where the wagon boxes were, I'll be talking a little bit more about the controversy of the site itself. But on August 2nd, Captain James Powell, who was the commander of Company C of the 27th Infantry, that was the company that was out there on guard detail at that time for the woodcutters. His men had split up. Some went to the woodcutting side camps. Some were up with the cutters in the timber. Others were an escort taking logs back to Fort Kearney when the Indian forces attacked. And altogether, 36. First we were thinking 32, and then we've had some changes over the years on it. But right now the thought is 36 soldiers and civilians made it to the wagon box corral. And they had ammunition stored there, and they were able to fortify it with boxes of food and animal harness and things like that in between the wagons. And so they made a stand, and over 5 hours they withstood both mounted and foot charges by anywhere from 800 up to 1,200 or 1,000, 1,200 Indians. Probably not all coming at the same time, but various attacks. And during that period, 3 soldiers were killed and 2 were wounded outside the corral. And again, the number of Indians varies all the way from 6 on up to the hundreds, but probably closer between the 6 and 60 that Captain Powell had estimated is closer to the truth as far as the number of Indians that were actually killed, and maybe more died of their wounds. We don't know about that. Eventually relief came, and the soldiers abandoned the position, went back to the fort, and then a few days later, the relief company came out. They reestablished the wood cuttings, and they took the wagons from the wagon box position and moved them to the west and built another fortified position called the Wishart site, which was built by Lieutenant Alexander Wishart. And that's a very pristine site that you can still see out there today if you go to the wagon box where the monument is. Look to the west and you can see the remains of that, and we do give tours on a limited basis out to that site. So probably one of the problems with the wagon box corral where it was is that it moved. And probably wagon boxes could be salvaged that hadn't been burned or something like that. They had moved to this new corral, and that would create problems when the archaeology began, because suddenly you probably had stuff sprung all the way across the field that dropped out of those wagons and created problems of identifying the exact position. So anyway, after Fort Kearney was abandoned and this country was homesteaded beginning in the 1880s, and the wagon box site itself, somewhat forgotten about for a while. But then in the early 1900s, interest in these old Indian War battle sites became renewed around here. And in 1908, Colonel Carrington and a gentleman named Samuel Gibson, who had been in that fight, and other old soldiers came back here, and Gibson gave some directions on where he thought that the wagon box fight had taken place where the corral was. A gentleman named Walter Camp eventually took on the idea of locating the location. Some of the concerned local historians from Sheridan and from Buffalo also became interested in it. And then all through the early part of the 20th century, you had these old soldiers coming back, and basically it centered around 2 men. Samuel Gibson, retired sergeant of the Army that had been very active as a career soldier, and Matt Littman, who had been a corporal during the period of the wagon box fight. Both of them identified different positions where they thought the corral was. And it was kind of ironic because the main people from Sheridan that were the leading forces behind trying to establish it said it was a place in Johnson County. So Max Littman's site, they drove a steel or a pipe marker out there, which is in existence today. You can see it with binoculars if you look out there when the grass is down. Max Littman identified sites that the corral was here, and Samuel Gibson said, no, the corral was over here. Where Samuel Gibson's site was, they did dig and they found cartridge cases and that type of evidence. And pioneer Wyoming historian, Grace Raymond Hebert. She adopted the Gibson position and pushed for that. Eventually Marker was placed up there. The first state railroad spike was driven, and eventually the little granite marker that you see out there was put there by the old Trails Commission. Historic Trails Commission showed that that was where the corral was. In the meantime, it kind of grew in terms of whether Littman's position, which is several hundred yards away from there, was the actual position, or this where the granite marker was that Gibson identified. And that has been the story of the controversy ever since with it. Over the years, various historians have went out, have done excavations. Some places they found evidence of cartridges. It really got confusing because they found both cartridges at both the pipe marker site and at the granite marker site, where the stone marker is in Sheridan County. So the pipe marker in Johnson County, the stone marker up here, cartridge cases found at both of them, although the cartridge cases at the pipe marker were from about 1868, as were the ones at the marker in Sheridan County from 1867. And how the ones got down to pipe marker, no one knows, but they're probably a year older than the ones that would have been at the stone marker in Sheridan. Now, when we decided to do the archaeology in 1993 and 1994, there had been some historians or some archaeologists up here before. The state archaeologist's office had done some work up around the monument, had found cartridge cases. But it's still, the controversy was still there. And so that was decided to address that. And what came out of that was a report after the 2 years of excavation, and then the report's published in January of 1997. One thing in my career I found, if you want something done speedily, it isn't going to be archaeology. You're going to have field work, and then you're going to have a report. And it's going to be a while. As a rule, we've had projects to where, in fact, we're still waiting for the reports from the Fetterman battlefield right now, and that's been a little problem. That's been done too. But so these things take a while to catch up, and for the reports to catch up with the evidence. And as you can see, you get a bag of stuff like that. All this has to be inventory. And the things, it's interesting. The actual digging, and I know Scott's very involved in it. Those of you who've been involved in archaeology, but personally, I find getting out there with a whisk broom and a trowel boring. And so I don't like to do it very much, you know.
Not to mention hard work.
Not to mention hard. And yeah, and you know, I like the documents. I love the documents, but the idea of going out there and finding something, for instance, just some of the artifacts I'll pass around that have been found. I wouldn't bother to pass around a horseshoe. You've all seen those. And there are just many of those. Horseshoes, oxen shoes, mule shoes. Some of them might be related to the period or the battle, but you got to remember there's also 2 years of traffic over those wood-cutting roads to where horse, mule, oxen shoes are being thrown constantly. So what's related to the actual wagon box fight, and what's just the traffic in the period, and what's just from the settlement period, because the horseshoe hadn't changed that much over those years.
Yeah.
And this small things, just a ring like that, just a plain old brass ring, or not brass, but just plain old iron ring from a piece of chain. Now these are the items I'll pass around. Cut nails, lots and lots of cut nails. But these are kind of the pride things I'll pass around that were found. I'll give you a little feel of the history of the site that way. One of the things they talk about are the 50-70 rifles, and these are a couple of 50-70 cartridges that came from there. And then they talk about the primer that made the difference between the cartridges that were at the pipe marker, which is what they call a Benet prime, which is a different type of prime thing. And this is what's called a bar angle prime, which would be the one But again, this is where archaeology amazingly, because people can find something like this out there in the dirt and identify it for what it is and have it mean something. And so where they found these, they found in this one here, for instance, in these shells, were found pretty close to where the stone marker is, where the big CC monument and the current little granite marker is on the Sheridan location. So I'll just pass those around.
Did they put up that big stone marker in 1908?
The one at, with the,
Yeah, right.
that's 1936.
Oh, 30.
It's a CCC project, and so they built that then. And then just a few other things interesting to pass around. A couple of arrowheads, steel points that were excavated. Again, these came pretty close from where the big stone marker is. Military button, and a couple of fired bullets. This one here is probably a pistol bullet. Looks like about a 36 caliber that was fired. And then I took me home to identify and recognize this one for what they say it is, but it's a fired 50-70 bullet that was outgoing, probably it was found somewhere out in the field away from the sites themselves. So anyway, it's just an indication of what was found there. But as far as location, again, you can't really say for sure where that corral was, but the interpretation now is that the corral, and this is from the archaeology reports here, is that the corral pretty much centered where we've got, if you go up there today, we've got a little pipe marker oval where the wagon box corral probably was. Probably very close to there, and that the evidence being the fact that around there you found like the steel points, which have been incoming arrows being shot into the corral, and you found the 50-70 cartridges there. And then later, when they excavated out to where the pipe marker is down to the southeast of there, they found 58 balls, which were probably those were fired by Indians that were sniping, shooting at the soldiers. The Indians, for the first time, had a pretty good firepower when they attacked the wagon box fight, because they had all the guns that they captured in the Fetterman fight, and most of these were muzzle-loading Springfield rifles and Spencer rifles, and so you find 58 caliber balls out there that had probably been overshot and ended up flying out the field, and they found quite a few of those further out down by where the pipe marker is. And probably those were fired by Indians just alongside the edge to the north of where the wagon box corral was. I got some of the things I wanted to read from the report to you here. Let's see. They asked several questions, and the one that I really wanted to read to you is where the wagon box corral defense site was. So that's one of the questions that we're going to answer by the archaeology and the investigation. And again, here's a disclaimer. This question cannot be answered with full confidence, but a strong argument is made that the area around the state marker in Sheridan County is fairly close to the defense perimeter. Several comparisons made between this area and the pipe marker in Johnson County, which is the other most frequently cited location, illustrate our conclusion. First, the state marker is closer to key topographic features in the battlefield landscape than is the pipe marker. And it's based on the fact that Gibson said that the corral was only about 75 yards from the ridge slope to the north, which would be about there, from which the Indian sharpshooters were shooting into the corral, and all the people who were killed in the corral were killed by rifle fire. And the state marker is pretty much parallel to the roads that ran through there too, whereas the Johnson County features several hundred yards down to the south of that crest where the Indian snipers were. They also talk about the fact that the Indian, or not the Indian, but the infantry camp, the soldiers' camp is right next to the corral. They have found spoons, remains of tin cups, canteens, and those items right next to the corral to the south of it, about where the camp would have been. And there's no evidence of that down at the Johnson County marker, as far as any type of camping equipment or anything like that. Wagon parts and cut nails, they found quite a few of those at the around where the stone marker is. At the pipe marker, they found some, but again, with traffic and wagons up and down there for 2 years, plus the homestead period, who knows when things might have fallen off a wagon. Nails might have fallen out of the wagon, or might have had a keg of nails spilled that was being transported somewhere. So there's that kind of question as far as what was being found, and most everything seems to point pretty much, again, to the shared location as being where most of the evidence is. And incoming projectiles, those steel arrow points there, the round ball, those type of things were found like they're being shot at the corral itself, as opposed to the 58 caliber bullets that were found down around the pipe marker, which might have been overshot. You know, maybe Indians overshooting that. And they also found 50 caliber bullets down around the pipe marker, but again, that was probably, if there's mounted Indians that were attacking and the soldiers firing at them, they were probably overshooting them, and those soldiers were landing several hundred yards away. So most all the evidence seems to point pretty much to the idea that the corral was located somewhere closer up around the stone monument. Now you can't say for sure, it might not be at that exact location, it could be, 15, 20 feet off, or it might even be a few yards off from that location, but it's very much evident now that that's probably the place where, proved by the archaeology, that took place. This hasn't stopped the controversy. Go down to Buffalo quite a bit. There are plenty of people down there that still are convinced that the pipe marker is the location. And for many years, there were people that thought the Wishart site was the location because it is a fortification. And it's very evident. And if you go out there and you go to the Wagon Box site, just look toward the west and you see that very definite site of where that fortification was built. August 2nd, we do a tour and we go over to the Wishart site every time then. So that's a good time if you want to come out and study the Wagon Box site. Come out on August 2nd when we do our evening tour to be able to take you around over there. I did bring some copies of both Jerry's book and a couple of copies of that, of the archaeological report. If you want to look through this archaeological report, there's evidence in there by maps, a list of all of the artifacts that were found, and it kind of goes on and on and on in many ways. So you can always look at so many cut nails that way. But there are some things in here, such as there's map reports and things like that showing the scatter of the artifacts. So feel free to look through on those. I think that probably the conclusions now would be pretty much that it is located up there again where the shared marker is today, and just the fact that the artifacts have been found that we have. But I'm sure that the controversy isn't going to go away, and there'll probably be something that'll be argued about off and on from time to time. That's basically the main part of the presentation. I just wanted to throw it open for questions. Yes.
One of the things that I thought was really interesting in the early presentation that I heard you make was how they determined what was incoming and what was outgoing. You might talk a little more about that.
Okay. Yeah, and the incoming, again, say at the where we think the corral was. And again, that's where we had bullets coming in there and arrows coming in there. Maybe someplace being stopped by the wagon box in case hitting the ground. Unfortunately, that soil out there, it's hard to tell. You can't really say, well, that came from the northeast or that came from the southeast or something like that. But just by the impact and the type of weapons they had. If there's arrows there, you can guarantee that it wasn't a soldier shooting a bow, that there's an Indian shooting a bow that sent that arrow into there. Same with most of the round balls and the 58 caliber, which would be the muzzle loading rifle round. Those and everything were probably Indian weapons because they had captured those weapons. And so we think that, and again, what really confuses the fact that, well, if you've been, if you've been out shooting enough yourselves, you know that you overshoot things. And when it goes, that bullet will travel a long ways in some cases. And that's what, in many cases, all of a sudden you have bullets several hundred yards where they might have been intended to hit, but they still hit. And then people don't realize that, well, they think, well, that might have been the location because there, well, it might have been several hundred yards of bullet travel beyond it at that time. But the round balls and those things are pretty much Indian impact rounds, whereas the soldiers and the civilians and they're pretty much were shooting repeating rifles that would have been shooting a conical ball like we have today, just a regular oblong type of slug. And so that would be the main difference you can tell about impact on that. Yes.
How about the location of that monument? Did they just luck out, or was that based on, some information from the pioneers, or what?
That started with the big, where the stone monument, the granite. That came from Samuel Gibson originally, and he was headed up there and fell off his horse, hurt himself in 1908. They gave directions, and the gentleman gave him to, went, dug, and found cartridge cases there. And from there, that's where Grace Raven Hebert, the historian, took off, got those cartridge cases checked, and then she led the charge as far as saying that's where it was. So the evidence was there early. Walter Camp and the ones that were accepting the position that Max Littman, the other old soldier, said was a pipe marker. They, again, did find some cartridges down there. And also, you had Littman who was there, and he said that's where it was. And so it's, it's one of those deals, if you just look at the eyewitness accounts, it's almost a 50-50 standoff. But then if you start to bring in the archaeological component, you start to look at the idea, okay, where are the artifacts being found, what kind of artifacts are being found, then that really shows pretty much that the private stone monuments where the corral is located. And again, the exact location of that corral, we'll never know that. To say this is it and go out and, it's impossible because they did move the wagons that were salvageable over to that site a week later, the Wishart site, and as a consequence, they probably, they destroyed the evidence early before the corral
But
was.
most of those wagons were shot up pretty good, weren't they?
They were shot at pretty good, and if you look at the maps in the book here, you can see there's a big debris pattern across the field. And they probably, I don't know how many they salvaged, probably not that many, but if they were just dragging things from the old corral over to the new corral, they scattered a lot of material.
That green you got there, you think that might have been off one of the wagons?
That could have been, yeah, probably was, or a logging chain.
Did you find anything, or did they find anything in the 93, 94 excavations that they could say were parts of the wagons?
Yeah, there were things that, certain scrap metal, certain iron pieces, you could document that. Also certain parts of oxen, yoke, and harness work, we did find things like that. So it's bits and pieces, and then there's enough evidence still in 93, 94, just 3 boxes, and say even 2 boxes of that was maybe just stuff from the settlement period to current period. Everything from a 1880s, piece of an 1880s plow or something like that, up to a piece of a modern saddle. But to sort it out and to look at what was actually fragments dealing maybe with the battle, most everything is pretty much in that pattern between the stone monument and then that Wishart site.
Now, up above the battlefield are where the old ice houses were, aren't they?
The ice
The
house.
block, maybe the block.
The blockhouses, yeah, okay, yeah. Yeah, the blockhouses were up there.
And have you done much excavation?
No, those are all on private land. We've had good luck with the blockhouses. I don't know if you've done our blockhouse tour that we've done once or twice over the years. And, well, Adrian and Steve, they've got a location that possibly is one of the blockhouses. And that probably would be an ideal location for excavation on that. But there are, most of them are on private land, and we do a tour to several of those blockhouses. And we did that year before last. We did a tour up to them. And they're very definite. I mean, there's like entrenchments, and I know Glenn Swing and Elsa's Spear Byron had done a lot of work around those, and had found cans and military debris that pretty much showed, that those was there. There's a very good one that's up on the Goodwin's land on the hill above there, and there's a lot of evidence there that it's kind of deteriorated over the years, but a lot of evidence. It's very large building there. But that's the thing, is that there's so much activity all through the timber in those 2 years, and then with the settlement period on top of that. And I've had people who could take me to a stump and say that was cut during Portville Carney. Well, I don't know. Where somebody like Glenn Sween would go and take a ring bore and go in and look at the age of the tree, and when the tree died, I believe his evidence, as opposed to somebody goes up and says that was, he's got axe prints on it, so it was cut during Portville Carney period. But the blockhouses, and that's the thing, there's just so much traffic through there. And unlike the Little Bighorn, where everything happened in 1 day, or 2 days, everything's condensed. And so you could say most everything is going to probably be from that battle. To where something like the wagon box fight, where if you get into wagon parts and horseshoes and nails, well, you've got probably 2 years of traffic of what was in existence, and then traffic ever since then of our agricultural use and that. So that makes it tough that way. But the things like the artifacts, that passed around, that are very definite proof. There's been no one shooting steel arrowheads up there for a long time.
Yeah.
Or 57 shells and that type of thing. And so those are the type of things that I think are pretty well proven to the point that the battle itself was located, or that the wagon box corral is located there. But I guess the thing is, you gotta remember is that's a huge battle too. We're talking something almost probably 600 acres if you think about the whole scheme of it. And that with the firing that the soldiers were doing, the Indians were doing, the bullets flying over, that things were impacting all the way down to Little Piney Creek and all around there, where I don't think you're ever going to really excavate all of the artifacts out of there. There's still a lot of it very rich up there.
Sonny, is the Wishart site on private land, or is it accessible by the public except during the tours?
It is owned by the Fort Carney Bozeman Trail
So we
Association.
can walk up there?
Yes. Yeah, main thing would be just, check.
I've heard they're really fussy about the pipe murder. Is that true?
That is owned by the Whittier family.
Yeah.
And we've never had any problems. We've asked permission, but I don't know. I'm sure they would want a lot of people wanting to go out there, but but we've never had any problem of getting permission to take a tour or something out to it. That way. But the pipe marker site, I mean, it's one of those things you just can't discount it. You can't say, nah, that's just impossible. It couldn't have been there. I mean, you just don't know. There's still enough of that question. And I guess in my own mind, I can't really totally discount the old soldiers' opinions of where it was and the old accounts. All the evidence says that, that I've seen in these reports says that, yeah, it was at the stone monument. But it could be halfway in between too. That's the interesting thing about history. The question's still there in that way.
What about the story that Jim Gatchell had a bunch of Boy Scouts or boys out there with rakes raking up those bullets?
I don't know. I don't know where he's raking it, around the pipe marker.
Yeah, but apparently he had a big collection of bullets and cases that he gathered.
Well, I think those are the ones that were the 1868. Somebody was shooting up there, but when they were shooting up there, that's the question.
Well, there were a number of ambushes of the logging.
Mhm. And going into that next year, it continued up into that, really till the fort was abandoned. Something like that could have happened in that way.
Anywhere along here.
And as far as you know, the story of them breaking them up there, I've never really seen any real documentation of it. I know one of the days I tried to talk to Bob Edwards, see what they got at the Gatch Museum.
Glenn had told me that, and then Sterling Finn mentioned that last week.
Well, I read the story, but I don't know, I've never seen the artifacts. I guess it's, yeah, I suppose they got buckets of them out there around the stone, when they were digging when Grace Raylan Hebert, and they were digging up there, supposedly there was large
One
amounts.
thing that might make real clear, Sonny, is that there's 2 stone monuments.
Yes, there are.
And just a short distance apart, there's the one that was set there originally, and then the one built by the CCC.
There's one set in 1920, I believe, which is a little granite monument that's in the corner. And then there's the large native stone that the CCC's built, the one that they've used for target practice over the years. So. Any other questions?
This is one of the last things, a little off topic, but do you have any leads on that brass?
On the brass eagle? No. No, we do not, unfortunately. And that was one of the most heartbreaking things, when I thought that was gone. And you see where they pried it off.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. I mean, it's, you don't know whether, you hope that if somebody got it, their fireplace might get back, they didn't sell for scrap someplace, so.
Well, yeah, it's like that tombstone that the truck driver stole from Billy the Kid's grave down in Mexico.
Oh, really?
You never heard about
No.
California truck driver? Went in there one night and tore off the tombstone and threw it in his truck and hauled it back to California. When his neighbors, he boarded it and they recovered it.
Amazing people want for souvenirs.
Isn't it a document what happened, then the exact site?
I think so.
Yes, no.
Yeah, it is, and that's where, and again, my tendency is to lean toward documents. To me, archaeology is a supplement. So other people feel that the documentary supplements the archaeology. So, I guess I go around here so often that all I know is that documents get a little less glamour than else. But that's all it is. And you're right, I agree.
But there's a lot of space, especially in Wyoming and southern Montana.
Yeah. And you have something that you actually, it's not like old castle runner sites around here. And then the speculation, that's what the fun is, the speculation. Where we can have 2 sites. We can have right 3 markers. And that's fun. Think of that.
Well, thank you very much.